I don't know what episode we're on now. We've lost track. We've done that many. We're to the third and short overtime. This week we're concentrating. After all, we've done the reviews of all the all the divisions. We're going to concentrate on some offensive breakout players. We've all picked one each, and we'll talk why we think they're next year is going to this season, should I say, is going to be their breakout player, and we'll all have questions about each other's players and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't think there's much else to say on the matter really, apart from who wants to go first. Maybe that's something we should have shouted out before we started, but but I'm going to go on my screen, looking from right to left, and it's Mark. I'm going to put Mark on the spot straight away and start. And I'll let him introduce his player. I won't steal his thunder. So, who did you pick for offensive breakout player next year?
Thanks for going for me first. When I feel like this is a disclaimer all the time for me. I've done no research, but I did choose somebody who I think is in line to have a really good breakout year this year. To be honest with you, it's kind of a bit of a sneaky pick, because some people would argue we had a breakout last year, to be honest with you. But I think that with the tight ends, you know, like the top 3 tight ends in whatever order you want to go in, Kittle, you know, Waller and Kelsey, and there's arguments for whatever order they go in. There's a vacant spot for the 4th tight end in the NFL, and I've decided to choose TJ Hawkinson as my 2021-22 season breakout player. You know, like I'm big. You know, like I liked what I saw from TJ Hawkinson last year. You know, he had a run of games where he was really dominant, and up until the point where Stafford got injured, and he suffered with some injuries himself, you could argue he was on course for a 1,000-yard season. I remember watching him against the Green Bay Packers, it was, and he had a brilliant game that game. And you know, like he was well thought of coming out with Iowa. He was the first tight end taken off the board, you know, like in the 2019 draft, ahead of Noah Fant. Yeah, and he's a bit of a do-it-all tight end. He's good in the blocking game. He can run block. He's good in the receiving game. He's got yards after catch ability. And what he started showing last year was he was showing more red zone ability as well. I think to truly break out, I think that's what we need to see from Hawkinson this year. You know, is more work in the red zone. But yeah, I think he's on for a good season. So that's the guy I've chosen. I've got some statistics around it, but I'm going to let you ask us some questions first on what you think might make a difference. And do you agree with my pick, or do you not agree with my pick? And then I can use these stats to kind of put up the argument if you have got anything bad to say.
I think it's best to go with the Lions fan here, isn't it, and ask Bones if the first question if he's got anything. I'm be positive.
I'm in agreement with Mark. I think this guy is like, I think you could say if he can have the breakout year that he needs to have, he's like borderline. He is a borderline elite tight end. Like, he is really good. He's definitely one of the top. Like after the top 3, the big 3 that Mark's already mentioned, he is, in my opinion, the next best tight end in the league, and he's underrated for the same reason that I said Stafford was the other week when we talked about the Rams. Nobody watches the Lions, so nobody gets to see this guy play. But he's fast. He blocks. He's just. There was a play last year where he got hit after catching the ball by 2 different players, stood up, and got like 5 more yards after the 2 hits. Like, he's just a great player, and I love watching him play. And I hope we have our own version of those top 3 players in TJ Hawkinson. I got nothing bad to say about the guy. Love him.
I think for me, I'm a big fan of him. I think he's got the qualities to be a top tight end. But if I'm looking at something, it's obviously I think it's obvious to everyone. It's Jared Goff who was the main quarterback there. Is that with what we saw with the Rams? I know it's a fresh start. We could have something really good, you know, potentially. But I'm just thinking, will his production suffer?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm pleased you asked that, because one of the reasons I had from having a breakout season was the addition of Jared Goff. You know, like, I'll tell you why. So Jared Goff last year threw to his tight ends in LA for almost 1,000 yards. threw for 938 yards in Los Angeles and 7 touchdowns. Hockenson alone had 6 touchdowns last year, but he threw for 7 touchdowns and 938 yards to tight ends. The difference is there is he was throwing to 2 tight ends. That's the combined statistics of Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. But I wouldn't let that worry you too much, because what we know is in Detroit is they've got a very, very thin wide receiver, room, and they've also got nobody of any real note behind TJ Hockenson. So last year he saw 78% of the tight end snaps. This year I think it could be 90. I think you could see as much as 90% of all tight end snaps being Hockenson on the field. So basically, in other words, if the Lions are lining up with a tight end on the field, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be Hockenson who's on that field. So there's very little bullet behind him. And Goff, as I said, has actually got a bit of a history of throwing to tight ends, or at least when he has one that's hot, he goes to them a lot. I'm thinking, remember 2019 when Tyler Higbee got really hot at the end of the year, and Goff was just feeding him the ball. And if anyone was playing fantasy then in 2019, most of you will remember that Higbee won a few leagues as a result of it. And he got really hot, and Goff just trusted him and just started feeding him the ball. 2020, his stats dropped off a bit, and he started spreading it between Everett and Higbee. But I think if Hockenson can earn the trust of Goff early, and let's face it, this is a young offense. Like when you look at the wide receiver room and they've got rid of Golladay and Jones, Hawkinson's probably their number 1 target at this moment in time. And Goff should be really looking at him at every single possibility to be catching the ball. Does that answer your question, Jordan? What do you think of that?
I do agree. I do agree with you. It's going to be one of them, like you said, if it's going to come down to the trust in it. Like when you look at the wide receivers and the tight ends, the 2 experienced guys, the new guys that come in there, if he can get a partnership with TJ Hockenson, he's going to rely on him. He's going to lean on him at times. If he's struggling in the game, he's going to lean on TJ Hockenson and try to keep finding him. So you're probably right. Yeah, I don't think the production would suffer even if Jared Goff not very well.
I'll tell you what else. Like this offense is going to want to run the ball. They've got Anthony Lynn, who's recently come across from LA himself from the Chargers this time. They're going to want to run the ball. He likes to establish a run game. Which means that Hockenson, with his blocking qualities, is still going to be on the field for those. Which means when the play action comes along, Hawkinson's going to be on that field, and the defenses are going to basically not know whether it's a pass out to Hockenson or a run, because he's that good at run blocking. It's not like Waller, who strolls onto the field, who's actually an underrated run blocker. But let's just say Waller. Waller strolls onto the field, and the defense are automatically thinking, we need to look at a defensive back on Waller to account for him. Because it could be a telltale sign that they're passing. With Hockenson, you literally don't know. He's a bit like Kittle in that effect for your team, John. But when he lines up, like when they're playing in 21 personnel, this is why I was seeing the San Francisco 49ers, that offense could be so dangerous like last week. Because when you line Kittle up in a 21, like a 21 personnel, you don't know if you're running, or you don't know if he's going to flex out and he's going to be catching. And Hawkinson's got that kind of value.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison. Obviously, the Iowa comparison is always going to be there as well with those 2 guys. It's an unusual pick to take a tight end that high. I think he's, other than Kyle Pitts, which is obviously this year, I think only Vernon Davis is one of the only other ones I can think of that's gone in the top 10 in sort of my time watching football. He's a really good player, Hockenson. The only questions I kind of have are related to, we don't know anything about the Lions. We don't know what their offense is going to be. We don't know what the scheme is going to be. We don't know a lot about it, really. Do you think having Dan Campbell there, who, let's face it, is a former tight end in the league and most of his coaching experience is as a tight ends coach, do you think that has any bearing on possibly helping him break out? Are they going to be quite a tight end-centric offense? I know you said Goff throws to the tight ends a lot. Obviously that might factor in as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was my second point on why I think he's going to have a breakout season. Point number one was when Goff gets hot and he trusts the tight end, he feeds him the ball. My second point was Dan Campbell himself. You know, like Dan Campbell, like he says, was a tight end in the league, and he has been a tight ends coach for the time he's been in this league. I think Dan Campbell will look at TJ Hawkinson and see a mold of a player of what he wants. You know, like he talked about people coming in and biting kneecaps. You know, Hawkinson's a tough blue collar, you know, like tight end. He's almost like a throwback tight end to the Heath Miller days. When he came out that year, I compared him to Heath Miller. I said a little bit more athletic version of Heath Miller. In fact, to be honest with you, you know who the guy who he reminds us of? He reminds us a little bit of, you were saying about Kittle. I think he reminds me of Mark Andrews. You know what I mean? In Baltimore. And he would probably be tight end number 4 for me at this moment in time if I was grading in the NFL. And this is a guy I think who he can get ahead of, you know, Mark Andrews. And that would be my comparison for who he is at this moment in time in the NFL. Whilst he does have some Kittle qualities, certainly, and the Iowa connection makes you want to compare them to, I would say he's probably a little bit more in the vein of Mark Andrews, as in he can get up the seam and he makes a lot of those seam receptions. And that's what I like about him. And that's why I think if he can add more touchdowns to his game, if he can increase his touchdowns from, say, 6 to, say, 9 or 10, I think he could have a Pro Bowl type season this year.
I think you've made some really good points. I wanted to jump in quickly because, I mean, it's the Lions and it's Hawkinson. I think last year we struggled with red zone offense watching the Lions games in general. I think there's something to be said for scheme, because I do think if they targeted Hawkinson more, he is a good red zone threat, and I think he can be successful in that area. I was curious, do you think, because he is a good blocker and he is a good receiver, he's not slow, like he's a really good tight end in my opinion. What do you think is the glare? Like, do you think there's a particular thing that he needs to break through to hit the next step of being the next best tight end in the league?
I think he needs to stay fit. He's been banged up both of his seasons in the NFL. And I know he played 16 games last year, so he didn't actually miss any of that. But he was banged up for for proportions of that. I think if anything, he needs to stay fit. He has to stop running hot and cold. There was games last year where he was just really, really dominant. He went on a little run in weeks 11, 12, and 13 where he had like 68 yards against the Panthers. He had 89 yards against the Texans. He had 84 yards against the Bears. In fact, the week after, which is the one where I thought he had a good game against the Panthers when I saw his touchdown catch, he had 6 receptions and 43 yards, although 43 yards doesn't seem many. It was the 6 receptions and the touchdown in that game that I was impressed with. But to put that in a comparison, when I say he needs to be more consistent, there was games against the Jags where he only had 17 yards. Against the Saints, he only recorded 9 yards. This was only a few weeks after Darren Waller had tore the Saints apart in week 2 in Las Vegas. You know, so there is games, you know, like where he's just been a non-factor. And I think that's the thing when you look at him and you look at those top 3 or those top 2, you know, who were fit last season, Waller and Kelsey and Kittle when he's fit. They very rarely go missing. But I could count 4 or 5 games last year where Hawkinson was a non-factor. And that Saints game was really disappointing because, like I said, Waller tore that Saints secondary a new arsehole. They tried putting everybody on him. You know, they tried triple teaming him in the end. And he went for over 100 yards and I think about 12 receptions, you know what I mean? Absolutely. But yet 2 weeks later, Hawkinson could only get 9 yards. I think if he wants to make that jump into the elite level, and to be classed as one of those 3, you know, it'd be a 4th edition to them 3. I think that's what we need to see him do. We need to see him be more dominant for longer stretches. We need to see him up his touchdowns from 6 to about 9 or 10.
That's good. I think that's a fair statement to make, really.
I'm just going to ask a more general question. And it isn't really about Hawkinson, although he's a good example of it. If you're playing for a team that isn't nationally sort of featured like the Lions traditionally aren't, because, the history of not necessarily being a top side. Is it harder to stand out and seem like a breakout player? Like, does Hockenson have to go further than, say, I don't know, another tight end on, say, the Seahawks, for instance, or someone like that, a team that's nationally featured?
Would Hockenson be as well thought of as Blake Jarwin, for example, who plays for the Cowboys, had he played in the Cowboys? Because look at the hype that guy got last year before he got injured. There's definitely something to it being the televised market. Like if you're coming from New York, if you're a New York Jets player, or you're a New York Giants player, or you're playing anywhere in the NFC East, or you're playing in, like in LA, it's more natural you're going to be noticed more because that's got the biggest markets. And the reason why it's got the biggest markets is that's why they put it on TV more. I do think that Hockenson will have to go somewhere to be noticed at Pro Bowl level. Because I think the Pro Bowl voting's really ski with when it's who the fans get to see. And if you're not playing on TV, then the fans aren't seeing you. The fans are seeing Mark Andrews. You know what I mean? Or, that's who they're going to be seeing. They're going to be seeing Mark Andrews. And they're probably going to be seeing Kyle Pitts more in Atlanta than TJ Hockenson in Detroit. So whilst I think that Hockenson will have a better season, then arguably both of them, even Pitts as a rookie coming in, because I think rookies struggle at tight end for the first year, but I kind of think Pitts will be the exception to that rule. I don't think he'll necessarily get the credit he deserves and make that Pro Bowl, but I do think you'll have Pro Bowl worthy statistics, if that makes sense, John,
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's kind of what I was getting at. Like, can you have a Pro Bowl season, but because you play Detroit or one of the the lesser featured franchises, does it hold you back? I think it probably does, and that's a good answer.
Yeah. I mean, on my last point on Hockenson, another reason, and sorry, Bones, that Lions team is built to lead from the front. But if it's behind in games, which is a good chance there will be, given your record last year, Bones, again, sorry, apologies. They're going to be having to go at the air quite a lot, especially late in games. And like I said, Jared Goff hasn't got many targets, which means if you're chasing 7 points and there's 3 minutes left in the game, who do you think's getting fed the ball as often as possible? It's going to be Hockenson who's going to be getting that ball slung to him. He's going to be the reliable target in that 2-minute offense, in that 3-minute offense. So he's going to get opportunities here. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a 1,000-yard season. I'd like to see him have an 80 reception season. He got 73 last year. I'd like him to get 80, like in a 17-game season. I'd like him to get 90, really. I think he's good for 9 or 10 touchdowns. I think a good season for him. And people will argue, well, Mark, he nearly got 800 yards last year. Is he not already broken out? But I think to be classed as a true breakout, at least for Hockenson in this case, 1,000 yards is the threshold, and I think he's capable of getting it for the Lions.
Yeah, I think you made some cases and answered some many doubts. If anyone had any about if a breakout season for Hockenson, I think go on then. I'll take the reins next. I'll go with mine before you two go, and because I'm kind of just excited to talk about him. Really, I'm a big fan of this guy. He's a wide receiver for Chicago Bears. Darnell Mooney going into his second year. After his rookie year, and it's a bit similar to Hockenson. He didn't have that bad of a year last year. He's I think about 600 plus yards, just over maybe off like 61 receptions on 98 targets, 631 yards, only 4 touchdowns. But for a rookie season, not too bad when your quarterbacks Mitchell Trubisky and I think Nick Foles were thrown in there a few times. He's only 5'9". He's not the biggest. He's not very big, like a big receiver either. I think he's only 170 plus pounds. But obviously, I think I know the question's probably going to be about the quarterback, so I'll leave that for now. But for me, he was going to be the number 2 going into this year anyway, and what he did. But he's definitely the number 2 now that Anthony Miller's gone over to the Texans. He's the clear number 2 for me, obviously, with Allen Robinson still there. But this guy, to say he's so small and like so light, like I say, I think he's about 176 pounds, sorry. But his catch radius is unbelievable for a little man. He's his reach and not just his reach, that he holds onto the ball as well. You know, if he went and obviously I'm not going to show you any now, but after just go look at some of his highlights of like catches, they're so far away from his body, under throws from Trubisky, you know, like with throws from that should be right into his grasp, you know, on the run. He's still making catches, you know. He's got everything in his locker as well. He's not just a speedster down, you know, to stretch the field. He's got all the moves that you want. You can do anything you like, really. You know, fantastic drag routes, slant routes, you know, out routes, everything. He's got it all. Like I said, I won't mention the quarterback yet, but yeah, he's. I really like him, and like 600. I think 630 yards he had last year, 631. I think I said. I really think he can reach that 1,000 yards, dependent on certain things, which I'm sure you're going to ask me. But I've heard rumours that Allen Robinson's going to go into the slot this year, so he'll be on the outside a lot more. But he can play the slot as well. He's so versatile, this lad. You know, 5th round they picked him up. 5th round, you know, like it's an unbelievable steal on what we saw last year. So obviously the Bears have had their problems before on offense, but before I'm similar to Mark. I've got a few things here I can say, but I'll let you throw it out to you if you've got anything that I can answer. Go
on, I'll ask you first.
Go on.
You know, Darnell Mooney. When I think of Darnell Mooney, I like them. You know what I mean, Jordan? I'm like you. I like them coming out the 2019 draft. You know, he was fast. You know, he ran a really quick 40 time. He ran a 4.3. I think it was a 4.35 or maybe a 4.38 or something like that. Like, you know, he came out with Tulane, and I liked him. He's one of them that was slept on a little bit, but he started rising up the boards, didn't he, towards the end. I remember Daniel Jeremiah liked him in a lot of the coverage that he did. People were talking about maybe going as high as the 3rd round in the end, especially after that 40 time. But when I think about what he did in Chicago last year, his average yards per reception was actually only 10 yards. Now, that was because of Mitchell Trubisky's inaccuracy down the field. That's because Mitch Trubisky couldn't drop a bucket in a swimming pool over 30 yards. You know what I mean? He couldn't drop a football in a swimming pool over 30 yards. His accuracy down the field was, I would throw a better deep ball than Trubisky. So I'm guessing that Mooney was probably open more often than those 660 yards would represent. So, you know, like, and regardless of what you think of Andy Dalton, or whether you think it's going to be Justin Fields starting, Andy Dalton can throw an all right deep ball. He hasn't got the biggest arm, the Red Rifle, but he can throw an accurate deep ball. And I think moving Mooney out of the slot into the Z receiver position, playing the speed flanker, letting them get deep more, and having somebody like Fields, or if it's Dalton, being able to drop the ball into him. Because I'm just guessing, looking at his yards per reception, 10 yards per reception, and the fact that he's got like 4.3 speed tells me that Mitch Trubisky just couldn't hit him when he was open. He was probably over firing him or throwing God knows where. Opposition safety. You know what I mean? Though that's probably where he was throwing to. So I'm with you on this, Jordan. I do think that we can see more in the deep game from him, because he's clearly been able to do it in the short yardage game. You know, if he's got 660 yards, you know, 10 yards of reception, he's doing all right in the short yardage game. But yeah, coming into the NFL, that wasn't even his strength.
I think he hit the nail on the head there, because when I went back and looked at a few highlights before over the weekend, I just wanted to go back and look. It's been so long since I've seen him this season. The amount of times, like you said, that Trubisky, there were so many times that he just left cornerbacks for dead, and he's looking for the ball and he's coming back to get it. But the great thing about that, I saw, obviously you want it in front of you so you can run in a touchdown, but he was coming back and actually catching these balls, you know, these balls that are away from him, he were making catches. And I'm sure, like all of you will remember the stop and go that he did on Jalen Ramsey. You know, it absolutely left him for dead. And where were the ball? No, I mean, see Mitchell Trubisky overthrew him. So I think this is, like you said, I think you got it spot on, really. You know, we don't know what we're going to expect. Like I said, Andy Dalton, there's talk of Andy Dalton starting, Justin Fields, maybe. Like I said, Andy Dalton can throw a deep ball. I'm a big fan of Justin Fields. If he starts off and gets into the rhythm straight away, I think it's going to benefit him. But obviously, we will see. But there's one stat that I saw with I've never even heard of this stat before. Mark, you're the experienced NFL guy. It's it's called a cushion. You know, like the cushion yards of when you receive your tight end lines up, the cushion distance between the cornerback or whoever's marking, and Darnell Mooney had the highest average of what yards that they give him because they're so scared of his pace. I think it was something like 7.6 yards of like distance that they leave between him because they're so scared of what he can get behind them. This is people like Janoris Jenkins, you know, top cornerbacks, the guy out of Green Bay, Jair Alexander. These are good cornerbacks that are fearing him, and he's beating them for pace. And when you're giving so much space like that, the slants and the outs and the ins open up for you because there's so much. So that's why I think they can do what they want with him. I'm not saying Matt Nagy and Co will be able to do it. A lot of people have a bit on the fence with Matt Nagy and things there. You know, we will see. But I think what they can do with him is so diverse. He's such a talent. And I don't speak highly of Chicago Bears very much, but this guy is absolutely fantastic.
I'm just going to come back on one point. I'm just looking at Pro Football Reference, which is where I look at quite regularly for the, you know, like offensive player statistics, because they break things down really quite well there. And there's two stats which are leaping off the page to us. Obviously, there's the, you know, like the yards per reception, which we talked about early. The yards per target were only 6.4. 6.4 yards per target. What about a guy with 4.3 speed? And you're playing him in this dink and dunk. You know, 6.4 yards average target depth. You know, but one statistic, Jordan, which I feel has got to get better, is his catch percentage. His catch percentage was 62% last year. You know, I feel like that's got to get better. I know that some of that might be down to Trubisky's accuracy and how often was Trubisky putting it in a position where the cornerback had a chance. But that catch percentage, he's got to get better at the catch point. He's got to get better at fighting for the ball, at using his body to fend off a corner or whatever it may be. Because that catch percentage has got to come up a little bit in my eyes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like you say, a lot of it could be from quarterbacks. And to be honest with you, me thinking it's going to be a breakout season, I am hoping, because I'm a big fan, Justin Fields is going to come in. Maybe not straight away, I don't know when it is, but I am a big fan of Justin Fields. I think he can perform in the NFL, and I'm seeing it where if it does run smoothly, you know, I think he's an intelligent lad. I think he can come into this offense and do a lot better job than Mitchell Trubisky. No disrespect, you know, even now. I'm just hoping that comes through. That's where I see a breakout. You know, obviously it could go the other way. You know, with the quarterback situation. You know, like I'm not saying maybe as bad as Mitchell Trubisky, but it still might be on the other side of it where you're looking and it's maybe not where you want to be on the quarterback side, and he might struggle again. But I just love Justin Fields. You know, like, and I'm hoping they get him in sooner rather than later. But even Andy Dalton can do a job. We've seen like him do it before. He's getting on a bit, but at least he's got some kind of accuracy there.
No, I agree. And I think as well with Justin Fields, if it was Justin Fields starting, when you've got a quarterback who can scramble like Fields and can keep the play alive, it naturally plays into the hands of small, shifty, fast receivers like Darnell Mooney. Because when plays break down, do you know what doesn't break down? Top end speed. You know what I mean? And when the corner's kind of like, do I run down now, and is the quarterback going to try and tuck it under his arm and run as his play's breaking down? He's having to break the pocket, and cornerback start getting caught into two minds. Do I go with my wide receiver, or do I now coming forward to make this tackle? You know, like Justin Fields can throw off any platform. You know, he can almost be like Mahomes, like he can look like he's falling away and sling a ball, you know, like 40 yards. I think Mooney could do well on those kind of ad lib kind of play breaking down plays, I suppose.
Yeah, I think before we get into one of the next two, I think it's the case with all our 4 picks, and it is a big deal really. With no training camps and no OTAs last season, you know, they're going to get that this year. You know, it is a big thing. You know, like being there on the field. You know, like talking. You know, like learning. You know, like getting to know the players around you rather than doing it over Zoom. I think that could be a big beneficial to this year as well.
I wanted to touch on something that was brought up there that I do think is quite interesting, because like whilst we've been having this discussion, like having a peer at some Darnell Mooney tape, basically just seeing what the Bears actually did, because obviously we play against them twice a year, so I got to see him a couple of times, but I don't follow the Bears that much because you're my divisional rivals. I'm not going to watch your games. Like the Bears scheme, like what they decided to do with him, like most of the plays that you see from him are crossing routes, barely in front of the line of scrimmage, short yardage, like try and get him in some open space, but not getting him in open space beyond the line to gain, like beyond the first down line. Like it's always just in front of the line of scrimmage, a couple yards, and then try and get yak, which I wonder if that is part of his average being low, is they're just not using him right in the scheme. Like you're trying to use your speedster as an underneath threat rather than an over-the-top threat. Is that something... You did mention you heard rumors of people changing positions. Do you think that's something the Bears are going to do differently this year? Do you think they're going to actually utilize his speed as an over-the-top threat rather than trying to get him underneath and hope that he can just run it and make the space on his own without... Do you know what I mean? Like, I hope I'm explaining myself.
No, I think when I was reading about it, like obviously this is just what you've heard. You never know what's going to happen until you get on the field in week one or in week one preseason. But I have heard that Allen Robinson is going to go into the slot, and like Mark said, he probably would become the main Z receiver. I don't to say that you won't see him in the slot as well, but it's one of them where it's like that. It is built for him the way he is to be that kind of player, but that is one of his main attributes. But he can do other things as well. But we'll see. It's obviously it's a lot hard to do when your quarterback can't throw a deep ball. You know, it's hard to get him into things like that. So if Andy Dalton starts week one, even Justin Fields, you know, they might use him more in the Z on the outside, you know, to get bound down the field, you know, and make these big plays.
I think he's got really good talent. I just think he's maybe in the wrong offense. But having said that, the whole dynamic changes. If the quarterback changes, I suppose it has changed already, but if it changes to Fields as well, the dynamic changes. The nice advantage that he has because of his skill set, although you would like to see him go for more deep balls and such, he's going to get a lot of targets. He's going to be a volume guy because somebody like even Dalton to an extent, but certainly Fields as well, they're going to be looking to those guys, you know, the slot guys. It's a popular position now in the NFL as well. You know, it's a third down role a lot of the time, but also, you know, you are seeing it more often than not now, 3 wideouts. And I think he could really make some noise. It's just about getting that production out of the offense. Now, it should be at least average this year, which it definitely wasn't last year. So I'm hoping that means that it will drag his numbers further up because he was a bright spot on a bad team last year. So I'm pretty bullish on him. I think he's a good player.
What would a breakout season look like from Jordan? You're saying he's your breakout player. What would you like to see? What would you count as a breakout season for Darnell Mooney? Would it be something like 50 receptions and say like 800 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns? Would it be something around that?
I was thinking if everything goes right for him, like he hit 61 receptions last year, if he can get 61 to 60 to 70 receptions and then get up to close to 1,000, you know. But I look at the touchdowns as well. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how much they used him in the red zone and stuff with Allen Robinson and Cole Kmet, isn't it, the quarterback? I don't know how much they used him in the red zone with him being a smaller receiver. But the 4 touchdowns, but that might come with obviously getting the ball downfield deeper. You know, like he might be getting more touchdowns. But I'd say if he can get close to, maybe I'm being a bit too steep there and stuff, but like 800, 900 yards off the similar reception, he's putting on an extra nearly 300 yards, you know, as the number 2. You know, like obviously Allen Robinson is still there. He's getting on a bit now, but I don't know what he finished on last year, Allen Robinson, to be honest with you. But yeah, if he can get close to them numbers, it's in a step in the right direction. I think it's an obvious thing to see, and it's all going to depend on the quarterback again, but I think he's very capable with either one of them coming in and starting, you know, to get further up the receptions and the yards.
So yeah, I was thinking similar to you. I was thinking like 50 to 60 receptions, less receptions, but more big play receptions.
Yeah.
You know, like more, because he's not going to be a red zone target. You're not going to be thrown to a 5'8", 160 yard, 5'10", 160 odd pound guy in the red zone. But if you can become a legitimate home run threat, you know, when they're looking deep and they land it on him, if he can have 50 to 60 receptions, kick his yardage up to like 800 yards with that big play factor equated into it, and turn his touchdowns into like 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, that would mean he's becoming this big player, which I think is what he is. That doesn't negate the fact that he can still do a lot of things underneath, but I would like to see him become more home run, you know, more like, you know, like passing on first downs. Let's put this bomb out and let's see him take a 30-yard reception, or maybe go from the house from like, you know, the 30-yard line or something like that, 70-yard reception, because he's capable of that, like, you know.
I think just a quick one before I get Bones in, because we probably had enough Bears talk for his liking. But it's like you said there. Like sometimes we're so obsessed with fantasy football. Fantasy football is fantastic. We're so obsessed with it. But at the end of the day, it's what a player can do for your team to contribute to winning games, getting to the playoffs and stuff. You know, it's not about getting as many yards as you can for your fantasy points. So if you look at Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2, you want him to get wide receiver 2 numbers and a bit more. It's going to help. It's going to benefit your team and get you to the playoffs potentially. So yeah, I'll leave it as there, because like I said, we've got a Lions fan. You don't want to hear much about Bears, so I'll come on to you, Bones. I'll let you talk about the player you've picked.
Thank you. It's not too bad. We got to talk about the Lions first, so it's not a problem. But no, I chose someone. I have to caveat mine slightly. Was similar to Mark. I guess you could say in a way this guy's first year was he did a breakout. He had a bit of a breakout year in his first year anyway. But part of the reason I wanted to talk about him was I felt he hasn't been talked about as much as he probably should have, in my opinion, after his first season, and that is Brandon Ayuk at the San Francisco 49ers, which is John's team. So I think the thing about Ayuk is, like I said, I don't think he's been talked about enough. I don't think that it's necessarily. I still think he can have a better season next year on top of this. I don't think he had a bad first season. That's part of the reason I wanted to talk about him. I think I know there's no doubting that Jefferson had the number 1 wide receiver rookie this year, but I think Ayuk could be in fair contention for number 2 up there with Lamb, you know, and Judy and people like that. He had comparable yardage. He played well, and I just think I'm very interested to see what this guy does next year. And there are a few points about watching his play from last year that I did want to bring up. I think the detractors from this guy will say, "Oh, he's just good at getting schemed open by Shanahan. It's all Shanahan." And whilst there is something to be said for that, Shanahan's scheme is a good scheme. You still have to have the player. And the thing about Ayuk is he was noticeably a good scheme fit even in his college days. Like when you look back at it and when you look back at the pick, you can see how he was going to fit into Shanahan's scheme from the get-go. It doesn't, and at the end of the day, he was picked to go there. Like, yeah, all right, say he's getting schemed open, but he fits well in that scheme, and he is part of his success. There's something I talk about a lot when we come to wide receivers, I think, and I think it'll be noticed if you've watched all of the stuff that the Overtime group have done, is when it comes to wide receivers, I like clean route runners. I don't necessarily look for the highest top-end speed, but if your routes are, if they're on point, like you're doing exactly 10 yards out and then cutting in, like you're not going 11 yards, you're not going 9 yards, you're hitting exactly 10 yards and cutting in. I like to see that. And I think Ayuk is he's a clean route runner, but he's also a smart route runner. You'll see him if he's going on like a post route, he'll fade outside at the start and then cut in to sort of try and bait people into coming outside, or he'll turn completely away from the quarterback to snap back into the inside of the field. Like he's got such quick turnaround on faking out defenders. I think it's great to watch. And I do think it's not as talked about as it could be in this 49ers offense. Because again, it's all about the scheme. It's all about Shanahan's scheme. But this guy plays really well in it. He's really good in open space, in my opinion, like from watching what he plays. And you can see it in college. They threw him a lot of screen passes, give him the space, give him a couple blockers. And I think they did that in the 49ers offense as well. We saw he had a couple of rushing plays where they were end around routes, basically, where he'd come around the back and he'd come up behind a couple of blockers. And again, smart. This is something that comes up with this guy a lot. you'll see wide receivers when they're handed off the ball like that to do run plays, just burn it up the field as fast as they can. But you see Ayuk take a couple steps, let his blockers get set up, and then play from behind his blockers. And it's just smart stuff like that. I really think this guy's set for being like one of the Niners' best receivers. And it's a tough group, I think, because you've got three, including really good receivers there. Kittle is obviously up there. Samuel, when they're both healthy last year, is a bad example of a year to look at. But he can beat man coverage. We saw that when the Niners played the Pats. The Pats had some success against Baltimore running man defense to stop what they were doing. And Ayuk still successfully beat the man coverage, so it didn't really stop the Niners like it did the Ravens. So, yeah, I mean, I think with the healthy Jimmy G or Trey Lance, whoever ends up starting for them, the 49ers throwing to him next year, rather than Nick Mullins, who is a serviceable backup quarterback, but he is exactly that. He's a serviceable backup. He's not your starting quarterback by any stretch. I think there's every chance this guy has a better season again, and he already had basically an 850-yard season. He was 12.5-yard average when he was catching, with 77 yards running and a couple touchdowns there. I think I imagine we'll see him feature in the run game even more next year, because he did have some really good standout moments in the run game. The only other point I wanted to say was, coming out of the draft, he's 4'5", 40. People might have said he's not that fast, but I think when you watch him play, we have those players where people talk about the 40 speed and then their in-game speed, their playing speed. And this guy, sometimes you could mistake him for a 4'3", 40 receiver in some plays. His off-the-line speed, his first few steps, they're really good. His 10-yard split was good on the 40. So, yeah, no, I think this guy plays better than he's given credit for. And yeah, I think he'll have a good year next year. And I'll open it up. Sorry, I've rambled a bit.
Well, I suppose I'm a 49ers fan, so I should probably respond to that. Brandon Ayuk was one of the only players worth watching last season. Speaking as a 49ers fan, obviously we had a rather tough season, but I thought he was tremendous. A couple of points I would pick up on. You said about people say, Shanahan schemes people open. There's an element of truth to that. There's definitely some players that have had big years in Shanahan systems that, that wouldn't anywhere else. Taylor Gabriel springs to mind. But what I would say is, yes, he can do that, but he also likes having that top-end talent at that position. I actually think that you have to look at when he was drafted to us, and obviously in 2020, we ended up with 2 first-round picks because we traded up to get Ayuk. If he'd have wanted to take, a Jerry Jeudy, or I'm trying to think if Ruggs went before him. I think he may have done. Yeah,
Jeudy was still on the board. You went back and got Kinlaw instead.
That's right. Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb was the other guy I was trying to think of. We're both on the board at the time, and heavy rumours was we were kind of interested in both of those. He went with Kinlaw instead, and we thought that was basically the end of bringing in another weapon. But then he trades up and gets. So this is a guy that he's chosen, and there's obviously a reason that he's picked him. Similarly with Deebo Samuel, who's going to be playing opposite, we traded up for him in the second round. Shanahan knows what he wants out of receivers, and for him to pick Ayuk, I think is a big, big thing. And he, like I said, he was tremendous last year. You can't put too much stock in his numbers because that passing game was, atrocious is probably too kind a word for it in some of the games. It wasn't the threat that it will be this year, regardless of what people think of Garoppolo or Lance. It's going to be a better offense this year, and I think he will benefit from that. One thing you didn't touch on, I'm not 100% sure this will happen, it's just been speculated on. We are looking for somebody at punt returner. We've tried a few people at that position. It would be risky to try a starter there, but he's one of those players that, and you rightly said it about him in the run game too, you want to get the ball in his hands, and I think we may end up going with that. And I could see him having a really good year. I think he could be one of those players who, if you don't watch the 49ers every week, you see on Red Zone making ridiculous plays. And that's probably how these players become popular. That's probably how these players, do break out and become sort of nationally known. The only issue that he's got is we're quite built around George Kittle and, to an extent, Samuel. But I think there isn't a 1 and a 2 at receiver for us. It's kind of 1A and 1B. So I don't think it'll have a huge impact on his numbers. So, yeah, I'm pretty... obviously, never going to complain if Cindy picks a 49ers player to break out. But at the same time, I think if I was picking somebody from our offense, that's what I would have gone with. So, solid pick, I would say.
I think you touched on something there that I did consider, and I hadn't actually brought up. Not the punt return of it, but the whether you have a true wide receiver one at the Niners. I think to Aiyuk's credit, I don't think he'll ever be a true wide receiver one. I don't think in any offense this guy plays. Like, as good as he is, I don't think he is a true wide receiver one. I do think you want him in the two. I do think you want him as in the Niners offense, the 1B. And I think he's good there, and he will work there every single time. We saw it in his first year. I think he could, in a better Niners year, in a better offense with healthier quarterbacks, I think he could have 1,000-yard season easily. I think he should. I hope he does. But yeah, easily. And maybe more than... I mean, 7 touchdowns isn't bad. It's just 2 of them were rushing, and he's a wide receiver. So I'd hope to see a bit of an increase in how many receiving touchdowns he gets, I guess,
what we could do with him doing is becoming a red zone threat, because that is something that the 49ers have lacked pretty much the entire time I've been watching them. We've never really had, maybe Anquan Boldin when we had him, but we've never really had that guaranteed go-to guy in the red zone. And Shanahan traditionally has had that. Of course, he had Julio Jones, which is a large part of the reason why. But, you know, like that is missing from this team. So if he could become that, suddenly his touchdown numbers go up as well. I think he's a really interesting player. I don't see him taking a step backwards. He may stay the same, but I certainly don't think he's going to get any worse. So yeah, I'm quite intrigued to see what he does this year.
Yeah, I loved him coming out of college. You know, when he at the Sun Devils, you know, he was such just a highlight reel to watch in college. I think you touched on it, John. I think the only concern I have is if George Kittle is fully fit for the full season. You know, I think when I was looking at the stats before, I think they only played about 7 games together, and I think 5 of them he had 3 touches or less, and it were like 40 yards or below. You know, like I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but that would be my only concern, really. You know, they've got such a deep reception thing. They've got definitely Deebo Samuel's there. I'm not saying he's going to get touches, but Sanu's come over as well. You know, so that would be my only concern, is if he gets as many touches with Kittle, if Kittle gets through a full season. But
I do think if Kittle comes back, there is the chance that he might not see as much of the ball, but I do think there's something to be said for the fact that last year he did have Mullins throwing to him. Like his receptions weren't bad, but there were passes that were errant passes and stuff like that. And I think more consistency in the passing game might see his yardage be more consistent across each pass. Like I guess that's the only thing I say. I get it though. Kittle coming back, he is your number 1 target of the Niners. It's just teams know that you need someone else to throw to in case. Like I just think he's got the talent, and I'd really hope that he does get more this year.
I mean, even in the Super Bowl year, obviously everybody knew Kittle was the number 1 target. You could argue that was a hindrance in the end, because although Samuel had a very good season, he wasn't getting a ton of the ball. I think Aiyuk is the other threat now, and I think hopefully we're going to develop the offense to the point where all 3 of them are getting pretty good touches, because teams are going to try and take Kittle away. You know, we snuck up on the league in 2019, really, and he was injured most of last season. I think even towards the end of 2019, teams were focusing on dealing with Kittle, so I'm expected to see that continue. So we do need another solid option, and I think he's the obvious candidate. But he's a home run threat. We've used that phrase as well. He's a home run threat because of his speed, largely. You know, he is capable of getting behind defenders, and you need that in our division, because if you think about some of the defenses we play, it's a lot of press man coverage, and it's a lot of, you know, tight lockdown, attempted man to man. If we've got somebody that can beat that, as you say he did against the Patriots, then you know it does change the game. Anybody with that skill set changes how the game works. You know, changes what the game is for an offense. So yeah, I can't wait to see what Shanahan does with him, to be honest.
It's amazing what a quarterback can do. You know, I was looking at that and I was thinking, Brandon Aiyuk, let's see if he, first of all, like, I'm like you, he's probably the 3rd receiving option on that team behind Kittle and Deebo. but he's got the potential to be the number 2 ahead of Debo. Can establish himself as that, as the lead wide out instead of Debo. Both of them are very similar. Both of them have run good routes. Both of them, a good yards after catch. Both of them can run the ball as well themselves. That we used in the running game. John made a really good point. This was Shanahan's guy. He traded up to get this guy, deliberately give capital to get this guy, like Trey Lance. This is his choice. So when I think about number 2 wide receivers, I think who's the best number 2 wide receiver in the NFL? And I think Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's the best number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. If Mike Evans is the number 1 in Tampa, Godwin's his number 2, and he's the best number 2 in the NFL. He could be a number 1 on most teams, but for Tampa, he's a number 2. So obviously, Chris Godwin's got Tom Brady thrown to him. Brandon Ayuk last year had Nick Mullins, Jimmy Garoppolo for part of it. Bit of a mishmash. I think Bethard even threw a few passes last year. So we saw a bit of everybody at some point thrown for the 49ers. What we'll have, right, okay, is we'll have Brandon Ayuk, who has a 62.3% catch average. Sorry, 62.5% catch average. So he's catching out of the targets he's getting, he's catching 62.5% of them. Chris Godwin is catching 77.5%. That's the difference, and that's what elite receivers can do. Elite receivers really want to be catching, 3/4 of the ball that are thrown in their direction. 75% is the threshold you want to see for somebody who's doing, who's making that elite jump. We talked about Mooney before, and I said I would like to see Mooney get above 70%. But if Brandon Ayuk really wants to be this team's number 2 wide receiver, I think he has to be having, we'll have to be seeing him catch 3/4 of the balls that are thrown. 75%'s got to go into his hands. And there's no reason why that shouldn't happen if he's got somebody better throwing the ball. I'm not saying Garoppolo and Trey Lance or Tom Brady. You know what I mean? But, they're certainly better than Nick Mullins and Bethard at some point, Another little thing that I wanted to make is, we talked about Darnell Mooney, how he was badly used or used improperly in an offense. I think Brandon Ayuk just landed in the perfect team for him. You know what I mean? What they want to do, what Shanahan wants to do, what he builds his offense on. Again, when they're going to be playing in that 21 personnel, good luck picking your poison with players like Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Kittle, on in that receiving core, because all of them can do similar things. And good luck trying to find out which one is the design play threat,
I think these are all fair points, to be honest, about Ayuk. I think, it's like I said at the start, a part of this was, I as much as I do think he could have a better year next year, I did want to touch on the fact I just felt he'd not been talked about enough this year, in a way. But no, I agree. I do think that there is the room for other healthier people to step up, and I do think his catch percentage needs to go up. But I do think there's as much errant passes and quarterback rotation causes those as dropped passes. So hopefully the 10% that he's missing is quarterback error, not receiver error. But we'll see next year, I hope.
Yeah. What would be a good season from John? You're a 49ers fan. What would you like to see from Brandon Ayuk? What would you think is a good breakout worthy season from that kid?
That's an interesting one. I think I hit on I think Bones kind of hit on it earlier. It's the total touchdowns needs to go up. We need him to be a threat, to get in the end zone. I don't think his yardage totals were that bad. 750 yards last year. If he can up that to close to 1,000, that's a good season. If he gets 1,000, that's a brilliant season. But I'd love to see him getting in the end zone a little bit more. At the moment, it feels like, and I could be wrong about this, but it feels like the only people that get in the end zone for the 49ers generally are one of the running backs or George Kittle. We need somebody on the outside to get in the end zone more. I know Samuel does it to a degree, but I think Ayuk has got a little bit more home run to him. Samuel's my favorite 49ers player. I'm not even gonna pull the punches on that one. He's my favorite player, but I don't think he's that guy. I think Ayuk is that guy, and that's probably what you want. you know, a match of sort of smash mouth and a bit more, you know, somebody who's a bit more of a deep threat. So yeah, more touchdowns, 10, 15 touchdowns. I think he's had a good season.
And I think I know we're talking about players, but if San Francisco get that quarterback position right, they're going to be scary good on offense. So that leaves us with John. JP, you're the last one to see us out. Who's your breakout candidate on offense?
So naturally, we couldn't pick players from our own team. I don't know if we didn't specify that, but we couldn't pick players from our own team. So I started looking around for some franchises that I was sort of high on when we did the divisional breakdowns, and some of the players in there that might be, that might be on the verge of a breakout. And I ended up looking at Washington quite closely. And I went with Antonio Gibson, the running back. It's hard to break out as a running back now because so many teams in the NFL are running by committee and, you know, different things like that. And even in Washington, there's a fair bit of running back depth there. J.D. McKissick, in particular, had a pretty big year last year catching the ball. I don't think he did much as a runner, but, you know, he had a pretty solid year. But I really like this guy. The more I started to look into Antonio Gibson, the more impressed I was. I mean, it's one of those. It was a strange offense last year. They didn't have a lot going in the passing game. We all know the reasons why. They didn't really have a quarterback. You know, obviously Alex Smith is not looking especially healthy. The end of the season, but I can't even remember the guy's name. I've completely blanked. Who started in the playoff game for them? The quarterback. I forgot.
Heineke won it. Heineke.
That's it. Yeah. And you know, he did pretty well, but beyond that, they didn't really have much of anything. So it was a run-first offense, I think, in large part because it had to be, but also like Ron Rivera is a pretty run-first, you know, kind of guy as a head coach. Obviously, as an ex-player, ex-Chicago Bear. Look at his Panthers teams, that sort of thing. You know, they're a heavy run team, and when you look at his stats, Antonio Gibson, he had a really good season. I've started looking at the PFF stuff, which I've got into recently. Thanks to Mark for lending me the subscription. But I was looking at some of his stats, and he had a 85.3 rushing grade, which was top 5 in the league. Now that's pretty impressive on a team where everybody knows you're going to run. He ended up with 11 touchdowns as well, which is a pretty good number, I would say. Obviously, like McKissick was taking a few away from him. You know, one or two other things going on, but I thought he had a pretty good year. One of the stats that jumped out was he had the lowest stuff rate of any running back, I believe. He very rarely gets stopped behind the line of scrimmage, and I think in an offense like theirs last year, that's pretty impressive. He reminds me a little bit of a guy who came up statistically. Apparently, he was the first Washington rookie to get 1,000 yards from scrimmage since Alfred Morris. Now, Alfred Morris is not a particularly well-known name, but I remember him being in the Shanahan offense, ironically, at Washington, and he had an absolutely storming year, and he actually went on to have a pretty good career in the NFL. I think there are some similarities here. Some interesting bits with Gibson, of course. He drafted out of Memphis in the 3rd round, but he's actually a receiver at Memphis. He wasn't a running back. He's kind of one of those players that's been moved around a little bit. What it does mean in terms of running back, and we talk about this all the time on this program, kind of like you only have a certain amount of carries in a running back. So obviously, the lighter they're used in college, the more you're going to get out of them in the pros. So I think, you know, he's probably at a stage where he's not really got that much tread on his tires. He carried the ball a fair bit last year, but in college he didn't. The slightly surprising bit being that he's an ex-receiver is his receiving stats weren't brilliant. Now, some of that is, again, the passing game, but McKissick was taking a lot of the receiving role. So I'd like to see that improve. That's about the only thing that I looked at and thought, and I wish he was a little bit better. His receiving grade was a bit in the 50s, I think. It wasn't great. That said, he still had quite a few catches. You know, I think this is a team that is going to build around its running backs. If you think of Ron Rivera's offenses historically, they've had those sort of running backs, you know, DeAngelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart, Christian McCaffrey even. One of the comparisons that's been coming up recently is I've seen the nickname knocking about that Antonio Gibson is the DC CMC, which I think might be a little too high a ceiling for him. But I see where the comparison comes from playing style-wise. I'm not saying ability is at the same level, but I do kind of see it. it's tough being a running back in your second year. A lot of running backs have took the world by storm in the rookie year and not done much in the second year. Doug Martin is probably the biggest example of that. The old muscle hamster, I think he called himself. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about this, and one of the biggest things to like about him is the change in the offense. Obviously, they've gone out and got Fitzpatrick, who is not he's not going to move the needle. He's not a brilliant quarterback. He's not a top 10 quarterback, but he is better than what they had, and he is going to make them probably league average passing game wise, probably maybe a little bit higher. I don't think they're going to be tremendous, but they're not going to be awful, and it stops teams stacking the box. Some of the more interesting stuff, obviously, they got Terry McLaurin, they got Curtis Samuel brought over in free agency, who's a player I really like. Obviously, he kind of fills that hybrid role as well. I'm interested to see what happens when he gets Gibson and Samuel on the field. I think there could be some potential for some swapping around there. They've also got De'Arne Brown, who's a really good player. I really like coming out of college. So I think there's a lot of threats on that offense, but I think that will open the run game up. I think this is a team that is going to prefer to run the ball, be ahead, keep running the ball and just try and control the clock as well, because that takes some pressure off the passing game. So all in all, I'm seeing a pretty good season for him. I don't know, numbers-wise, he had a pretty solid year last year. I think the closest comparison or the leap he would hope to take is probably that of somebody like David Johnson when he was at the Cardinals. Obviously, his career's kind of tailed off since then, but he became a very sort of solid all-round. He probably won't get to the stage where he's running for like 1,400 yards and nearly 1,000 yards receiving, but I think that should be his aim. That should be. I'm not saying he'll get there, but I think he's got a high ceiling as a player, and I will look forward to seeing him in that Washington offense. I think they're going to be pretty good this year, and if they're going to be good in leading games, they're going to need a good running back to control those games, and I think he could well be that guy. So yeah, he's not a name I'm that familiar with until this week, obviously, when we started looking at researching this, but the more I read, the more I liked, and I'm intrigued to see what he does this year.
I'm a big fan of Antonio Gibson, to be honest with you, especially coming out of college. Like I say, he did swap roles during there, but I think he probably would have had more yards. I think early on the Washington defense didn't really get going as much as we saw at the end of last season. So they were always behind in games, so they ended up like throwing the ball a lot more. So Antonio Gibson didn't see as many reps as he probably would have done, in if it were closer games. And I think next season the Washington defense will be primed and ready to go straight off, with the players they've got. They've got fantastic defense, So I think he'll see the ball a lot more. I know what you're saying about having like a running back tandem with J.K. McKissick, but he took a lot of the passing offense, and I think the two of his best games are when Antonio Gibson were injured. So I do think he'll get more. So I see why he would definitely could be a potentially breakout player, and I think he will get four figures, to be honest with you, if that defense plays well. I'll let you go, Matt.
No. I was just thinking. I was just thinking. I thought you had a really good year last year. And to be honest with you, he would have been 1,000-yard runner last year had he not got injured. He missed 2 games through injury, and he only actually started 10 games last year.
Yeah,
you only actually started 10 games last year. So he played 14 games, of which 10 he started. So McKissick was ahead of him for some part of it, I've been reading things about training camp. I've been looking at things, Antonio Gibson. There's a lot of fantasy leagues being drafted now. So naturally, you look at what the news reports of players who you might be looking at fantasy. Not that this is a fantasy pod, but that's how I've been looking at Gibson. Because I've been thinking, do I fancy him in fantasy leagues? And everything I've been reading from Ron Rivera and from the staff in Washington is this is our number one back. This is our number one back. This is the guy who's going to see the bulk of the carries. I think he might have been protected a little bit last year at the start of his career because he was a wide receiver in Memphis, even though he made that switch to running back, in the pros. But I think this year you'll just see him as a bona fide starter. And I think you'll see McKissick as the 3rd down back in that situation. And I think this kid can be a 3-down back as well. He's got the build, 220 pounds. Yeah. He's 6'1". He's got a good size for a number 1 running back. He can clearly catch the ball because he used to be a wide receiver in football. Run blocking is what he had to get better on. But judging by how many snaps he played last year, And I have got McKissick, who can come in as the third down back. You know, like arm pass block if he needs to. Because he needs to get better at pass blocking if he wants to be a true 3-down back. So you might be in a bit of a timeshare with McKissick, but I think McKissick's going to be a third down back at best. And this guy's going to be this is going to be the 20-touch a game guy, like, you know, 18 to 20 touches a game. I think he probably could have been a 1,000-yard receiver, 1,000-yard running back last year, really, couldn't you, John?
Yeah, he wasn't far. Ultimately, he wasn't far off. I think Jordan made a good point as well. He started to break out in the second half of the season. Seemed to sort of hit around the Thanksgiving game against Dallas. He seemed to, ran all over them. And after that, he just seemed to take the momentum into a bit like Washington as a team, really. Took the momentum into the second half of the year. We all liked Washington when we looked at the team in the divisional stuff. I think this is a microcosm of that. He can be a very, very good player.
I think like I know Dallas were quite poor on defense last year, but like Mark said about getting 15 to 20 touches, I'm just looking at stats here. The twice he had 20 touches, he got over 100 yards, 128, 115, both against Dallas, and then the 16 attempts. Sorry, not I said targets now. 16 attempts, 94 yards. So you see, if he's getting up there with the attempts, he's going to be putting up to close to 3 figures or more each game.
Yeah, I've got good faith in him doing that. As you say, Mark, I think they may transition McKissick into a more third down role. That's kind of mirrored how Rivera normally treats his running backs. So I think that's certainly possible. So yeah, I feel quite positive about that choice, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Gibson's a great running back. Realistically, I think you've chosen a good one. I think there's a couple. I think he had a couple standout games in the receiving department. I think he didn't have loads of great receiving games. I think they should. He's transitioned from that position. I do think there's something to be said for maybe getting more involved in the receiving game next year. Like Jordan said, he had a couple of games where he did go over 100 yards, handed the ball off to him a lot more, and he does just look like a solid running back that's going to provide Washington with exactly what they need to dictate the pace of the game. Like you were saying before, it's hard to really add anything at this point. I feel like I'm just repeating what you've all already said. But no, you know me, I do like to watch a bit of running football, and I think that he's got the spark, and I'm interested to see how it develops. I think the CMC comp is an interesting one. I'd love to see if he can live up to a CMC comp, because that is a big comparison to make.
It's a massive one. I think he's not at that level. But
hey, you never know. If he has the potential to break out and be even a little bit like CMC is a good running back. So yeah, I'd be impressed to see it. I'm looking forward to seeing more from this guy, especially after everything you've all said about him.
Do you know when we talk about what would be a breakout season from, the threshold for a running back breakout season has been the same since the dawn of time, hasn't it? It's like 1,000 yards. If you can run 1,000 yards, that should really be changed, I think, to 1,200 or 1,300.
Yeah.
A lot of that was set in like the 1960s, like when they were playing 14-game seasons. And then they were playing like 16-game seasons. And now they play like a 17-game season. So to break that down, like, where's my calculator? Because I'm rubbish at maths. And there's somebody who's good at maths.
Would you make it combined yardage in the modern NFL, though, considering how often running backs are used in the receiving game now? Would you say it's more combined yardage for running backs than just running yards, rushing yards?
I mean, well, put it this way, right, Bones? If you was to have a 1,000-yard season over a 17-game season, it only equates to 58.8 yards a game, which doesn't sound that impressive. So I don't want to say to have a breakout season, he's got to get 1,000 yards. But I would say, in some form, he's got to break 1,200. Be that 1,000 yards rushing and 200 yards receiving or whatever. I think 1,200 yards, all purpose, from this kid would be what I would say would be a breakout for him,
What about as a running back, touchdowns? What would you want to see from him? Like, obviously, he had, I think he had 11 rushing and 2. Yeah, no receiving. Sorry, 11 rushing last year. So would you say around about the same again? Maybe a few more.
More receiving touchdowns, I think, and maybe try and get up to 15, maybe rushing touchdowns, something like that. I think as long as he has a solid year, he's going to be going to be well thought of in that division. It's the NFC East as well, so anybody with a good running game is probably going to benefit.
I've always thought that 12 rushing touchdowns is a good benchmark for a running back. You know, like you're talking most games are putting one in the paint, especially with committee backs these days. I used to think Josh Jacobs at the Raiders, 12 touchdowns, that's a good starting point for him, like, you know. And I remember having that figure when he came in as a rookie. So I've always thought 12 has been a magic number. I might change that to 13 now with the additional game. So let's say, like, you know, like if you can punch in 13 touchdowns on the ground, maybe get 3 or 4 through the air as well. I think you're right, John. I think that's what I would like to see from him as well.
Yeah, so I know obviously JP picked the running back, but it's interesting to see that the wide receivers that we got. Obviously, it's going to be interesting on the quarterback from them, but I don't know. Go, Matt. Go.
Do you know what would be interesting? Yeah, you know how normally we do our table, you know, like we do our table of 1 to 4, you know, like on who was going to win the divisions. I was thinking of how we could do this. And what we could do like is we could either put out a poll or we could do both. One, we could put out a poll on who do we think is going to have the better season out of these 4 players, and let our listeners or stream followers or social media followers, and they can back whoever made an argument. Do they think it's Hockenson? Do they think it's Mooney? Do they think it's Gibson? Do they think it's Ayuk? And us now, we can rank it now from first to last in order. Who do we think's most likely to make a Pro Bowl out of these 4?
Pro Bowl.
I think that's a good question. I'm down for that. I might be biased though.
So I'm thinking that Mooney will probably be down the bottom, not because he's not a good player, but just because of the role that he makes and because of the position he's in. He's going to have to beat out some bloody terrific wide receivers, isn't he, really, as a second-year player to get into a Pro Bowl. So I think he's probably least likely to get in. Would you say that, Jordan, even on your...
Yeah, I probably agree with that. I'm just thinking now, like myself, like obviously Antonio Gibson's a good call, but obviously Hockenson on the tight. If you're thinking Pro Bowl, Hockenson on the tight end side, you know, obviously there's some good tight ends, you know, in the NFC, but there's only is it 2 or 3 tight ends that they send to Pro Bowl from each side?
4, 2 from each side.
Oh yeah, that for me is TJ Hockenson, no doubt. Then.
So number 1 goes TJ Hockenson. Number 4 goes Darnell Mooney. Where we're going with 2 and 3, are we putting Gibson at 2, or we're putting Ayuk, or we're doing it?
I would say Gibson at 2 because I don't think Ayuk is going to have the volume in that offense to stand out, if that makes sense.
Pro Bowl wide receiver's hard as well, isn't it?
It is.
You'd have to have like an all-world. So if he does, we're probably going to win the Super Bowl. So, let's hope he does go to the Pro Bowl. But personally, I can't see that. I think he'll have a good season, but I don't think it'll be enough to stand out from the rest of the
So there we go then. So our order, we think that Hockenson out of these 4 is more likely to make the Pro Bowl. We think Gibson's second most likely, followed by Ayuk and Mooney. Yeah. Now, put a poll out on our socials and get people voting in, and they can vote who they think is most likely to have a breakout this year. Who do you think is the most likely out of these 4 to have a breakout season?
I'd be interested to see what other people think about
this. There's an argument for all 4. We've made really good arguments, lads. I've enjoyed it tonight. I really have. I've enjoyed the whole discussion. We've clearly all brought a good player at the table. It's hard to disagree on any. I've not been able to pick fault with anybody's, which pisses us off, because I do love an argument. You know what I mean? You've all made some good points. Jordan, you're host, and I'll let you wrap this up, mate.
No, I think it's been fun. I said before we came on air that it's 4 players that I liked. I will try to find stuff to be like devil advocate, with to try to pick holes and stuff. But it's quite hard when there's 4 decent players there. I think a lot of it is going to come down to on certain players, like on schemes and quarterback situations. But take that to the side. These are 4 fabulous players who if they're going to have good years eventually, even if it's not next year. But yeah, I've enjoyed it tonight, and we'll get that poll up. We might bring it up on next week's show at the beginning, so you can shout out the results there. And on to next week, it'll be we'll go to the defensive side of the ball, and it'll be interesting to see which players we pick there.
I can't remember who I chose. I'm gonna have to go back out on my WhatsApp.
I think it was Derek Brown.
I don't remember who I said. Who?
Was it not Derek Brown?
Oh, I did see Derek Brown. Get in! Look how excited I am.
I have no idea who I'm going to pick yet, but
Right, well, let's disappear before we all give it away, because we want people to come back in next week, don't we?
yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't decided. I think we were thinking about maybe sticking to the Wednesday slot, guys, weren't we? You know, like going forward. So we'll have a talk off air, do defensive players, and we'll see you next week at a similar time for defensive breakout players of the next season. Thank you for listening, guys. See you next week.